What if everything you believe about self-esteem is wrong? What if liking yourself doesn't depend on achievements, beauty, or recognition, but on something invisible, silent, and deeply rooted in your emotional history? We live in a culture that sells the idea that you will love yourself once you reach certain milestones: an ideal body, a respectable job title, a comfortable bank account. But the truth is stranger and more disturbing. There are people who live far from the standards of success. They have no fame, no fortune, no attributes the world usually applauds. And yet they walk with a confidence that unsettles. They like who they are. On the other hand, there are those who collect medals, diplomas, achievements, and still feel small, guilty, insufficient, as if no matter what they do, they're never good enough. It's as if self-esteem follows a parallel logic, immune to the rules that govern external success. It's not about what you have, nor about what others think. It's about how your mind was shaped to interpret value, affection, and worthiness long before you knew what any of that meant. Self-esteem is an invisible but powerful construction, and its foundations lie in places we rarely explore. Three factors in particular seem to determine whether you will be your best ally or your worst enemy. It all starts with a question many avoid facing. What kind of love did you learn to receive when you were just a child? We're not talking about visible gestures, gifts, or hugs, but about the invisible emotional structure that supported that affection. The love we receive in our early years silently shapes the way we will see ourselves forever. For some, love came with labels, conditions, demands. It was necessary to get good grades, behave perfectly, always meet a standard that wasn't theirs, but imposed. These children grow up to become hyper-competent adults, tireless, hungry for approval. But behind the success, they hide an unresolved pain, the secret hope that one day they will finally be good enough to deserve the love they never fully felt. Every achievement becomes a disguised plea. Now do I deserve to be loved? But that answer never comes. Because it's not about the present. It's about the absence of something essential that wasn't given when it was most needed. Others, more rarely, knew from early on a kind of love that didn't charge, didn't judge, didn't condition their existence on any performance. They grew up with a kind of invisible foundation of internal security. They know, even in failure, that they still have worth. Getting fired? Painful, yes, but not destructive. A criticism? Unpleasant, but not a sentence about who they are. They don't need to prove anything all the time. They can simply be. And understanding this changes everything, because we live chasing goals, under the illusion that reaching the top will finally make us like who we are. But true self-esteem is not a trophy earned at the end of the race. It doesn't come with salaries, diplomas, or applause. It comes from within, from a deep process of reconciliation with our own story. You can be promoted, applauded, awarded. But if, back there in your emotional roots, what you learned was that you only deserve love if you're perfect, then no victory will be enough. There will always be a void, a silent echo of still not enough. That's why high self-esteem is not a direct result of external achievements. It is, in fact, a psychological work. It's the result of facing your emotional scars and understanding where they came from. It's recognizing old shames, impossible demands, the looks that were missing. Liking yourself in the end is less about conquering the world and more about making peace with who you were taught to be. Second factor, how you were taught to deal with your mistakes. There's something that deeply shapes the way we see ourselves, what we were taught to do when we failed. Some people, from an early age, were taught to believe that making mistakes is unacceptable. A slip-up, humiliation, a low grade, icy silence, an unthinking attitude, punishment, judgment, shame. Growing up in this environment is like living in a minefield. Any misstep could mean the end of love, approval, security. And the result is devastating. These adults become extremely harsh with themselves. They demand perfection. They punish themselves for every slip. They don't accept weakness, don't forgive their own failures. They feel they only deserve respect if they are flawless, as if making a mistake were proof they are not worthy of affection or value. But there is another type of upbringing, and another type of self-esteem that comes from it. It's those who, when they made mistakes, were not reduced to that error. They were welcomed, corrected, yes, but with understanding. They learned that failing didn't make them less loved, that making mistakes was human, and that repair was possible. These people grow up with a kind of forgiveness installed within them, not because they were overly indulgent, but because they understood that making mistakes is part of the process of living. And because of that, they allow themselves to try, to take risks, to start over. In these cases, self-esteem is born from the courage to be imperfect and still worthy. Because when a mistake stops being a sentence and becomes a starting point, your relationship with yourself transforms. You might not notice it, but perhaps a large part of what you call self-criticism is actually fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being punished, fear of losing your worth if you're not exemplary all the time. But real self-esteem doesn't grow in fear. It is born when you can look yourself in the eye, even after making a mistake, and say, I still deserve respect, I still deserve care, I still deserve to exist. Third factor, how we interpret the gaze of others. There is an even more silent, yet equally powerful aspect that shapes our self-esteem. It is the way we decipher the signals, words, and reactions of those around us, or rather, it is the meaning we assign to how others look at us. From a very early age, we learn to read the world. But what we see is not always what's actually being shown. When someone pulls away, when someone criticizes us, when we don't receive the response we hoped for, our mind rushes to fill in the blanks, and it fills them based on the narrative we already carry about our own worth. Those who grew up believing they are not worthy of affection will interpret any silence as rejection. They'll see contempt where there was only distraction. They'll see judgment in neutral eyes. They'll live with the constant feeling of always being evaluated and almost never approved. This is the trap of wounded self-esteem. It distorts reality. You do not relate to the other person as they are, but as your trauma has learned to see them. And so, even when you are loved, you won't believe it. Even when you are praised, you'll doubt it. Even when you are embraced, you'll expect abandonment. But there is another path. Those with stronger self-esteem aren't more loved than you. They just don't interpret everything as a direct reflection of their value. They are able to see that many times the other person is acting from their own pain, their own rush, their own limitations, and that this does not define who they are. They don't live trying to guess what others think of them. They don't need constant approval to exist. They have developed an internal sense of worth that doesn't crumble with every sideways glance, every silence, every unanswered message. The real shift happens when you understand that your self-esteem doesn't need to be a slave to others' opinions. When you stop reading yourself through other people's eyes and start seeing yourself from within, without filters, without distortions, without needing the world's reflection to know who you are. Because your story, your worth, your deserving, should never be in anyone's hands but your own. When we talk about self-esteem, many still believe it depends on achievements, compliments, or appearance. But now you know it is born from much deeper places. It begins way back in how we were loved or demanded. When we didn't even understand the world, it is strengthened or destroyed in how we learn to deal with our own mistakes, with compassion or with punishment. And it reveals itself every day in how we interpret the gaze of others, as if every gesture, every silence, were a mirror that confirms or denies our worth. These three factors are not easy to identify. They don't scream, they whisper. They live disguised in our habits, in our relationships, in our automatic thoughts. But they are the ones that deep down determine whether we'll spend our lives trying to prove we deserve to exist, or if we'll finally inhabit our own bodies with dignity without needing permission. Self-esteem is not a trophy. It is not a gift someone can give you. It is a reunion, a reconstruction, a process of returning to your emotional roots and rescuing parts of yourself that were forgotten, devalued, silenced. And the good news is that even if you didn't receive the right kind of love, even if you learned to punish yourself, even if you live in fear of others' judgment, that can change, because self-esteem is not a gift, it's a practice. And it begins the moment you choose to look at yourself with courage, with clarity, and finally, with compassion. Leave a comment below telling us how your self-esteem is doing. Give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and take care.